A woman undergoing a cosmetic procedure died shortly after it began. This man, Felipe Hoyos Ferronda, was paid to remove her butt implants. But prosecutors say he had no medical license, no surgical training, and no right to be in an operating room. Now, a mom of two is dead following the botched surgery, and the sham doctor is behind bars charged with manslaughter. The victim's family is calling him an assassin and wants him locked up for good. I'm your host, Kennedi Walker, and I'll walk you through the investigation. Maria Penaloza is remembered as a beloved wife, mother, daughter, and friend. The 31-year-old died after undergoing a cosmetic procedure performed by a man accused of posing as a doctor. Penaloza reportedly paid $1,900 to have her butt implants removed, a procedure her family told WNYW she sought because she was in pain. Felipe Hoyos Ferronda has been arraigned on manslaughter charges. On social media, Hoyos Ferronda referred to himself as a doctor, despite having no medical license. He advertised before and after photos of cosmetic procedures, offering them at a fraction of the price charged by licensed professionals, and performed the surgeries inside his New York home. According to investigators, Hoyos Ferronda injected Penaloza with lidocaine, a local anesthetic, and saline through a syringe. Shortly after, she reportedly became lightheaded and later went into cardiac arrest. Documents show Hoyos Ferronda attempted to administer an IV. He performed CPR and called 911. The mom of two was rushed to the hospital, where she was pronounced brain dead. She died 2 weeks later. Prosecutors say Hoyos Ferronda was arrested at JFK Airport as he attempted to flee the country to Colombia. Inside his home, authorities recovered medical equipment, including a metal IV stand, multiple injectables on the shelves, syringes, a box to discard needles, and a binder with the name of individuals. Hoyos Ferronda allegedly told investigators he performed the procedure hundreds of times and fled because he was scared. The phony doctor was indicted on charges of second-degree manslaughter, second-degree assault, and one count of unauthorized practice of a profession. He pleaded not guilty. In an interview with WNYW, the victim's family called Hoyos Ferronda an assassin and said they hope Maria gets justice. They've created a GoFundMe to help offset costs for her loved ones to travel from Colombia to the United States and say their goodbyes. And joining me to talk more about this is legal expert Aaliyah Roberts. Aaliyah, thank you so much for coming on today. Let's just jump right in. What kind of sentence could the suspect face if convicted?
Well, I'm so glad that you asked. I was reading the article about this, and he is charged with three different felonies. The highest being second degree manslaughter, which is a Class C felony, and he faces up to 15 years on that count. The second count that he was charged with was second degree assault, and he faced up to 7 years in that count. And the third count, which is people don't really recognize that you can be charged criminally under the New York education law. He can be charged with 4 years for practicing without a license. So a lot of years. We're looking at 20 over 20 years that he could be charged in prison for performing a botched surgery.
Wow. And could prosecutors pursue additional charges beyond manslaughter?
I don't believe so because when we're looking into to murder is the intentional killing of another person with malice aforethought, right? So the intentional purpose is kind of there, isn't necessarily there, and also there's a recklessness portion that you can charge when it comes to murder. But I don't know if this gives enough rise to recklessness because his defense is going to be, well, I am a licensed physician, so and I've done the surgery many times before, so it wasn't necessarily to the level of recklessness that would require a conviction. I think it also just has to do with prosecutorial strategy, which is why usually the highest count is always the first count. In this case, that's the second degree manslaughter with the 15-year maximum sentence.
And just speaking more about intent, though, I guess I'm wondering because it's not like he's a licensed doctor in the U.S. So could, it be argued that he because he's not licensed here, that means that he's not able to perform these types of surgeries here. So you intentionally are performing surgeries in your home, allegedly, and anything could go wrong. It's not like you're in the hospital. It's not like you're credentialed, at one of the big hospitals in New York and someone died.
Well, when it comes to the for murder, right, for first degree murder or second degree murder, which is the recklessness, the intent has to be more so like I intended to kill this person, right? That's where the intent is, and this doctor is going to say I didn't intend to kill this person, I intended to perform a surgery. Now, could one argue that, of course, even though you didn't intend to kill this person, performing a surgery, knowing that you were not qualified to do so, could also, result in the death of another person. Again, it really just gives rise to whether or not the strategy of the prosecutor thinks that that's something that they should do. I think they probably talked about it. I'm sure, all of the prosecutors and the DA all got together and had a conversation about what's the highest count that we can charge with. I just don't think there's enough on its face for an intentional for murder or even recklessness. It's reckless. Is it reckless to the degree of murder? I don't think so.
Could the suspect also face charges for fraud or misrepresentation?
I think that they should, but arguably that third count of practicing of unauthorized practice without a license, I think that's kind of the sentence that goes with the fraud and the misrepresentation, right? Because essentially you admitted to, well, not admitted, but you're being charged with practicing without a medical license. So that's that under the New York education law, that's that third prong. I think that goes to the unlicensed practice element. I don't know that fraud in and of its alone is a charge, right? You want to have like the highest charges first and then make your way back down. But I think that they considered it and they charged him with that New York education law violation for failing to practice without a license.
And if you could just, break it down for us, just the legal consequences of practicing medicine without a license in the state of New York.
Yes, you go to jail. I mean, it's really as simple as you, as a doctor, right, as a licensed professional, you go through all these years of schooling, all these years of training for a specific reason. So you don't show up in the basement of somebody's apartment saying that I panicked when something goes wrong, right? And by failing to do that in this specific instance, that is why the doctor was charged with this violation of the New York education law, because in the state of New York, you have a minimum requirement of educational practices and educational classes and training that you have to take before you can practice medicine, right? And even doctors who are licensed in other countries, they come here, they get their actual credentials from an actual hospital or through another doctor or with another practice, and they have other doctors who are licensed in the state of New York practicing with them or giving them the specific, prerequisites in order to practice in the state of New York. That happens often, right? Doctors who come from other countries for special surgeries or they have an expertise that no one else has. But you get what's called privileges. You at a hospital from other licensed physicians in the state of New York.
And now the doctor reportedly said that he performed this surgery several times, lots and lots of times. Does the fact that he allegedly is claiming that he performed this several times, similar procedures, strengthen the prosecution's case, especially if he's saying that he performed it potentially illegally in his home?
Yes, that he admitted to a further crime when he was speaking, and whoever his lawyer was should be ashamed because just be quiet, right? You admitted to doing this more than once, and because he did it more than once, and he was leasing a apartment in the basement, as we talked about the last time. Now we can bring the landlord in on criminal charges because now the landlord had to be aware that you were performing these surgeries unlicensed in a basement without the necessary, sterilizations and all the additional things that you would have at a hospital. So it was very interesting because he was just talking too much, right? Saying that I panicked in the middle of surgery, if you perform these surgeries over plenty of times, is not helpful to your case at all.
Absolutely. And how will prosecutors use the seized medical equipment and the client binder as evidence? They said they found a large binder with names on it. How exactly will they go about that?
Well, essentially, there's a couple of ways that they can do it, right? They can introduce it into evidence at the trial and have the defendant, this doctor, identify those specific clients, those specific names, and say, "Did you use this? Right? Were these your clients, etc." Or they can go one step further and reach out to those individuals in that specific client list and have them testify, depending on what the results of their procedure was. And depending on how successful or non-successful, it'll really just depend on what side the witness is for. Because arguably, if every other patient in this book had a successful surgery and there were no complications or no problems, the defense is going to say, look, I told you that we said that we've done this plenty of times before. This has never happened before. There's no way that we give rise to second degree manslaughter, right? There was no intention. There was no recklessness here because look, this has never happened before. But the prosecution will say, no, look, they've been performing these surgeries from all these people unlicensed for an extended period of time, and that's illegal, and he should be convicted at minimum on the failure to practice without a license count.
Right. And with that binder, like how you said, they could potentially reach out to other clients. Could, other alleged victims come forward, and how would that impact the case?
They can, and they should. I think it makes the count stronger. I think that if we have another situation like we have now with this poor woman who is currently brain dead, if they can find one or two more individuals who sustain serious medical issues such as her, it's possible that they could actually raise the count, right? Right now it's second degree manslaughter. It could go up to first degree manslaughter, or arguably if there's enough there to the recklessness standpoint, right? If he's hurt so many other women and so or people, because other men get these types of surgeries too. If he's hurt so many other people and they've sustained lifelong medical issues, that could give rise to the recklessness, and then we could arguably be looking at a murder statute. Murder is a lot harder to convict, which is probably why they went with the second degree manslaughter case. But if there's more evidence to support that, it's definitely a possibility.
What kind of defense might the suspect's legal team argue? What would you do if you were his defense attorney?
If I was his defense attorney, I would take a deal. But if I have to actually go to trial, I think that the defense I'm going to present all of his credentials in, I believe it's Columbia, where he's a licensed physician. I would present his medical training. I would present all of the surgeries that he's performed, his success rates at those surgeries. And I would say, medical complications happen even when you are in a sterile environment, even when you are in a hospital. Complications happen all the time, and this was just one of those complications. And unfortunately, this woman, she sustained a serious injury. She's brain dead. I also argue that the woman sustained. I mean, she was assumed the risk because she knew when she went to this building that it was not a hospital. She knew that she went into the basement, that this doctor did not have all of the things required of a hospital. And a quick little research would have told you that he's not licensed to practice in the state of New York. So arguing that I'm a stand-up doctor and arguing that the plaintiff assumed the risk by coming to me knowing that there was a risk of, serious injury.
Could Maria, the victim, her family file a civil wrongful death lawsuit?
They could, arguably, because he is not a citizen of New York, you have to have what's called personal jurisdiction over the individual. That means that they have to purposely avail themselves to contacts within the state. Because this doctor has been performing these surgeries for a serious amount of time, you can definitely say that the court has jurisdiction over this individual for purposes of filing a civil lawsuit.
What type of damages could the family seek in a civil case?
I think that they could, of course, compensatory damages and also punitive damages. Punitive damages is more so that we are setting a standard across the state of New York that if you do something like perform a surgery and you cause someone to be brain dead, you have to pay a significant amount of money, arguably a bankruptable amount of money, to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future. It's setting a precedent.
And in this situation, I know we talked about it earlier, about potentially suing the landlord. Can they also do that? Is that all? Could that also be a wrongful death lawsuit to the landlord?
It could be, yes, because arguably, but for, we call this proximate causation, right? It's also known as the but for test. But for the landlord allowing this doctor to have a space to perform the illegal surgeries would not have occurred to then cause this woman to be brain dead, right? You provided the location. It's similar to a felony murder, right? I just drove the getaway car, but you knew that the people in the getaway car had a gun and they were probably going to shoot someone. So you're also just as equally liable as the individuals who did the shooting, even though you were just the getaway driver.
How long does the family have to file a civil claim?
So wrongful death suits in the state of New York, I believe the statute of limitations is either 2 years or 3 years. I think it's 2 years for wrongful death and 3 years for medical malpractice, but it's either one of those two things for the statutes of limitations.
Could this be considered medical malpractice since he wasn't a licensed doctor here and this didn't happen at a hospital?
I think you get creative as a lawyer. I think that if you're filing the lawsuit, you definitely argue medical malpractice and wrongful death. You have, different counts in a complaint. So it's the first count, you're alleging that this was a doctor and this doctor performed medical malpractice. Count two, you're arguing that as a result of the malpractice, there is wrongful death.
Now, we also talked about this earlier about, if you were his defense attorney, you would ask for a deal and try not to go to trial. Could this case go to trial, or is a plea deal just more likely?
It could go to trial. The thing about cases going to trial depends on a lot of things, but simply it also depends on the personality of the defendant, right? The defendant might want to stand up and have his day in court and tell the entire world that he didn't do it and that he's a licensed doctor and that this is just a big mistake. Or the prosecution might want to try this case to set an example to make sure that it doesn't happen in the future. Like we said, setting the precedent and making sure that people know you can't just come to New York and perform surgeries if you're not a licensed physician. I think, like I said before, I would take a deal because especially with the binder and the medical evidence, finding him fleeing at JFK, it's a bad look all around, right? It's not a case that I would want to try.
What could a deal potentially look like?
So I think the best deal, we're definitely going to keep the unlicensed medical professional practice, that violation of the New York education law. That's up to 4 years. I think we could also keep the second degree assault charge. I think that I would try to get rid of the second degree manslaughter charge or get a lesser count on that charge. The reason they probably won't is because unfortunately this woman is laying in a bed brain dead, right? So the better from the prosecution side, they don't want to allow this doctor to get away with essentially murder, right? Because that's what happened. The woman is now brain dead. The victim is brain dead. So I think in the best case scenario, you knock down the second degree to maybe a third degree, or even get rid of it altogether, the second degree manslaughter charge, and just keep the assault and the violation of the New York education law. Like I said, because this victim unfortunately is brain dead, it's unlikely that they'll get rid of the second degree manslaughter charge.
The victim is actually dead now. She
Oh,
she died. She is no
yes.
longer on life support. She's no longer brain dead. So does that matter since she is dead?
Yes, it does matter. It does matter. And
Mhm.
because whenever there's a loss of life, you never want to let the person who was responsible get away scot-free, right? So knowing now that she has since passed away, unfortunately, that definitely arguably supports my argument even more that they're not going to get rid of the second degree manslaughter charge because she's no longer alive. If she was, again, unfortunately, if she was brain dead, maybe there's that argument like, oh, there's a possibility she might wake up, there's a possibility that she might be able to sustain some sort of life. But no, if she's no longer here, then they're definitely not getting rid of the second degree manslaughter charge. Maybe they do less years because the maximum amount of years for that charge is 15. So maybe we're looking at, I don't know, 10, 7 to 10, maybe knock off a couple years there. But arguably, if the doctor is not a citizen of New York, could probably just be deported. So that's also another thing to consider, whether or not they have the doctor serve his sentence in the state of New York and then deport him back to Colombia, or whether or not he is just immediately deported and they let the Colombian officials deal with him.
If this does go to trial, how long could it take? Are we thinking months, years here?
No, I think a case like this will probably last maybe 2 weeks. The reason why cases last a little bit longer is a lot of different things, ranging from jury selection, which should normally, in a case like this, a jury selection should take maybe 3 days maximum. But sometimes jurors are busy. Some jurors don't want to be there. You have to get the right pool to make sure that you're going to successfully win your case, prosecution or defense. And then you have scheduling conflicts with the judge. So all of that considered, arguably this case should probably be about a week to 2 weeks, depending on the amount of witnesses, maybe 3. I don't see this case being months long or years long. Like, this isn't, the YSL Young Thug case. Like, this is probably going to be maybe 2 weeks maximum. And in that 2 weeks, like, everything being done, unless God forbid, like, the judge needs a continuance or has another calendar that she or he needs to address. But it shouldn't take that long.
What warning signs should, people look for to avoid illegal practitioners, to avoid this? Clearly, unfortunately, anytime you go under anesthesia, anything can happen, but something like this, when you're not going to a hospital, just what can people look out for?
Mhm. So, whoever your doctor is, right, you have to do research from that doctor. You have to make sure that the doctor has the credentials that they need to have. We talked about this previously. A board certified surgeon, a board certified plastic surgeon, if you're doing something like cosmetic surgery, but any type of surgery by any doctor, you want to make sure that they indeed went to medical school, they completed their residency, they are licensed to practice in a hospital, preferably in the state that you're in. Sometimes doctors move, but if I have a doctor that I see that you've moved around a lot, I'm definitely concerned because there might be something there, right? I don't just like similar to, unfortunately when other people, normal people just move around from job to job, a year here, a year here, a year here. You're like, okay, why do you keep switching, right? Same thing with the doctor, because there might be a situation in which it's not on his record that he did something wrong or on his record that he didn't perform successful surgery, but there might be something there, right? You want to make sure that your doctor is board certified, as I said, the American Medical Association. You want to make sure that they are affiliated. It's also helpful that they've completed some sort of additional training in the field that you're looking for, right? So if you're going to get heart surgery, you want to make sure your cardiothoracic surgeon has not just his residency, but maybe a fellowship in cardiothoracic surgery, or that he's practiced under successful doctors who have years and years of tenure in that specific field, right? You don't want to go to a heart surgeon for a gallbladder removal, right? It's the same thing. You don't want to go to a regular doctor, a normal general practitioner to get plastic surgery. You want to make sure that the person that you are treating with has the credentials that they need, just like any other thing, right? You research your jobs when you interview them, research your doctors when they are performing surgery on you, because unfortunately, it's a very, very risky procedure. We're not talking about, a teeth cleaning. We're talking about a plastic surgery. And like we said, now this woman went from brain dead to now dead. So, and I'm sure she didn't think that was going to happen, but you never think that's going to happen until it does.
Absolutely, just such a sad story, and this is something that we will be following very closely here. Aaliyah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye.
A judge ordered Hoyos Ferronda to be held without bail. He is expected to be back in court in June. For Law and Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.